Uh, in her first in her first lecture, Elizabeth Costello objects to violation of animal rights and false assumptions that animals don't have reason. Human beings are superior because they have reason. Costello objects the experiment ignores any emotional hurt or confusion that the ape might be experiencing in favor of concentrating on what is a very elemental task. So, animal experiments fail to measure anything of real interest because they ask the wrong question and ignore the more interesting one. A carefully plotted psychological regimen conducts him away from ethics and metaphysics. Mean animals are used for experimentation, animals are slaughtered to satisfy the desires of human beings. That's a highly controversial point because in real life we see there are stronger arguments for use of animals for experimentation. Otherwise, there is uh, diseases which human beings, especially the children, they are experiencing. We have to choose, you can say, in two difficult choices: either to bear the cruelty with animals or accept pain and suffering of human beings. In second lecture, Costello suggests the human can come to understand or think their way into the nature of animal through their poetic imagination. She thinks that in rational account or philosophical account, any human beings will not be able to do it. But as a poet or through poetic imagination, human beings can show sympathy to animals. She invokes a poet Rex the panther and Ted Hughes the jaguar and second glass at jaguar. uh, and she takes issues with what she calls the ecological vision harbored by most environmental scientists, which values biological diversity and the overall health of an ecosystem above the individual animal. This is not a point of view shared by individual animals, all of whom will fight for other individual survival. Every living creature fights for its own individual life, refuses by fighting to accede to the idea that the salmon or the nut is of a lower order of importance than. Third event of Costello's visit is a debate of sorts with Appleton philosophy professor Thomas O'Hare. Thomas O'Hare begins the debate by proposing that animal rights movement is a specifically Western crusade. Western crusade means that's a Western idea and which is uh, actually projected with less rationality and more zealotry. Non-Western cultures can, with justice, argue that their cultural and moral values are different and do not require them to observe the same respect for animals mandated by Western animal rights activists. Costello responds that kindness to animal has been more widespread than you imply as the Western idea. As an example of kindness to animal, she offers the keeping of pets, which is universal. And she notes that children enjoy a particular closeness to animals. And she also proposes that industries that have been enacting animal cruelty for profit should have the greater role in atoning for that cruelty. But philosopher puts forward the argument that animals do not perform abstract reasoning as demonstrated by the failure of apes to acquire more than a basic level of language, and are therefore not entitled to the same rights as humans. Again, the idea which was discussed in first lecture of Costello, that animals possess reason, but philosophers disagreed because they thought that animals don't possess reason. Costello refers to such experiments as profoundly anthropocentric and imbecile. O'Hearn proposes that animals do not understand death with the full consciousness of self with which humans regard death. To kill an animal quickly and painlessly is ethical. So that's a novel by J.M. Coetzee. That's a novel of activism of animal rights. Animal rights is one of the dimensions of protecting nature, protecting environment, because change in fauna and flora, that is destroying the very balance of nature in the world. Now there is an Indian novelist that is very, like we can say, Charles Dickens of India, Amitabh Ghosh, who has written a wide variety of fiction. His novel, The Hungry Tide, that's actually about the crisis of sea creature as well as Sundarbans, forest. Of the easternmost coast of India, in the Bay of Bengal, lies the immense labyrinth of tiny islands known as Sundarbans. For settlers here, life is extremely precarious. Deadly tigers attack, and these are common. Unrest and eviction are constant threats. Tidal floods rise and surge over the land, leaving devastation in their wake. In this place of vengeful beauty, the lives of three people from different worlds collide. One is Piali Roy. Piali Roy is marine biologist who actually has come from USA, where she was brought up, and she has studied oceanography. She travels to Sundarbans in search of a rare dolphin, which name is Orcella breviostris. She meets a translator and businessman Kanai on Kolkata Railway, suburban railway, which heads towards Port Canning. Port Canning is a way to the Sundarbans island. When she arrives in Sundarbans, she hires a boat to look for dolphins, but her journey begins with a disaster. When she is thrown from a boat into crocodile-infested waters, rescue comes in the form of a young fisherman, Fokir. Although they have no language between them, in Pia, she can speak English, and Fokir, he doesn't know English, but they are drawn to each other, and they share an uncanny instinct for the waves of the sea. Pia engages Fokir to help with her research and finds a translator in Kanai, Dutt, a businessman from Delhi. That novel is taken as a great example of a political ecology. Mean how material interest of state and industry they are affecting the natural landscape, we can say including the islands and species like white dolphin. Another British Indian novelist, though she was born and brought up in Britain, Kamal, Kamla Markandaya, she is writer of Nectar in Sieve. Nectar in the Sieve is a title taken from S.T. Coleridge's poem Work Without Hope. There are two lines of this poem. Work without a hope draws a nectar in the sieve, and hope without object cannot live. Rukmani, an old woman, is one of the major characters of this novel. She reflects on her life. She is married at the age of 12 to Nathan, a tenant farmer. Her husband treats her with kindness and respect as she learns the chores her new life requires. Within a year, they have a beautiful daughter whose name is Ira and good rice harvest. During the next 6 years, Rukmini does not conceive, troubled that she cannot produce a son. For Nathan, Rukmini visits her ill mother and there meets Kenny, a foreign doctor. Kenny treats Rukmini her infertility without Nathan's knowledge. In quick succession, Rukmini bears 5 sons. With each birth, family has a little less to eat when a tannery is built nearby. Unpleasant change come to village life. I mean, on one side, there is the exploitation of an Indian woman in patriarchy as Rukmini, for the sake of, you can say, male desire for male child, she sacrifices her body and individuality. On the other side, there is leather business or tannery that affects the villagers, and Rukmini's two sons work in that tannery. They help the family a great deal with their wages, but are eventually dismissed for being ringleaders in a labor strike. The year they arrange a good marriage for their sister Ira, monsoon rain destroy their crops. Rukmini's sacrifices are saving to buy food for the family. Ira's husband returns Ira to her parents' home because she is infertile. Again, Rukmini turns to Kenny doctor without her husband's knowledge, this time to help Ira conceive. जैसे उसने अपना इलाज कराया था, बेटी का कराती है. His treatments are too late since Ira's husband has taken another woman. So Rukmini becomes pregnant again and bears her last son, Kuti. Caring for Kuti lifts Ira out of her depression and despair until the crops fail from drought and family again goes hungry. They sell most of their possession just to pay half of what they owe the landowner. Reduced to foraging for roots and leaves, family begins to weaken and starve. Kenny secures a servant's position in the city of Rukmini's third son. Rukmini's fourth son is killed stealing a calf skin from the tannery. No, the youngest son, Kuti, suffers the most from hunger. Ira becomes a prostitute just to feed her brother. Despite her efforts, that youngest brother Kuti dies because of famine or starvation. A good rice harvest arrives too late to save Rukmini's son. We can see different example of irony of fate and very like what's name Thomas Hardy's novels where coincidence and chance plays a role. Kenny returns from one of his long absence with money raised to build a hospital in village. He offers to train Rukmini's son Selva as his assistant. Some villagers speculate that Kenny is kind to Rukmini because they have an illicit relationship. A neighborhood woman Kanthi, who has turned to prostitution because of poverty, spread this rumor out of her spite. When they were both young, Nathan fathered Kunthi's two sons. Kunti uses this as leverage over them until Rukmini learns the truth and forgives her husband. Now, as Nathan nears 50, he has no sons left to work the land. He suffers from rheumatism and debilitating fevers. Rukmini and Ira try to help, but they are not able to support it. Ira has a baby to care for. That's an baby that was conceived in prostitution. The family experiences its greatest loss when land agent tells Nathan and Rukmini their land has been sold to Tenri. No one else will lease land to a man as old and ill as Nathan. And Rukmini and Nathan must leave their home of 30 years to live with their son Morgan in the city. They leave Ira and their grandchild under Selvam's care, their possession reduced to the few bundles they carry, and Nathan and Rukmini try to find Murugan in the city. They rest one night at a temple where thieves steal their bundles and money. A leprous street urchin named Puli helps them find the home of Kenny's doctor friend. They learn that Morgan has not worked there for the past 2 years and he has left the position for better wages. At collector's house, Morgan's wife informs them that Morgan has deserted her. Her older boy, their grandson, is thin with hunger, and that's again starving baby is too little to be Morgan's son. Rukmini sees that she and Nathan cannot impose upon their daughter-in-law. They return to temple where food is distributed each night to these destitute, behal, garib. Rukmini and Nathan dream of home but have no means to make the trip. She tries to get work as a letter reader but earns only enough to buy rice cakes. They entrust Polly with their earnings and they begin to hope. One evening Rukmini spulges on extra food and toys for Polly and her grandson. When she returns to Nutha at the temple, she expects him to be angry, but instead he is violently ill. During a week of monsoon rains, Nathan continues to work in the quarry despite his fevers and chills. One evening, after she gets paid, Rukmini begins to plan for a cart to take them home. Hurrying to catch up with Nathan, she finds him collapsed in the mud in the street. Kind strangers help them, where Nathan dies in her arms after reminding her of their happiness together. After his death, Rukmini promises Polly his health if he returns to the country with her. A promise Kenny and Selvam will help her keep. She introduces Polly to Selvam and Ira as the son she and Nathan adopted while they were away. Demonstrating hope and compassion, Ira hastens to prepare a meal for Polly and Selvam promises his mother they will manage. In this novel, we see effect of monsoon, famine, starvation, above all, an industry that is creeping in rural setting and affect causing not only poverty and prostitution, but that is also affecting the health of the people and polluting the environment. These are fiction and fiction work, but a small place that's a non-fiction or literary prose by a Caribbean fiction writer, essayist, and gardening writer. Jamaica Kincaid. Jamaica Kincaid published that small place. That's a collection of that's a book length essay which is a protest against tourism. In this essay, she takes the position that tourism is continuity of colonial imperialism. In first section of Small Place, Kincaid implies perspective of the tourist in order to demonstrate the inherent escapism in creating a distance from the realities of a visited place. Nadine Dolbe dissects the theme of the tourism in a small place, and she places Kincaid's depiction of tourism in globalized context. Dolbe shows Kincaid's depiction of the tourist creating separation by othering the locale and individual that inhabit. The tourist industry is linked to a global economic system that ultimately does not translate into benefits for the very Antiguans. Antigua is, you can say, one of the islands in West Indies. Antigua will, while being wholly ignorant of actual political and social conditions that the Antiguan tourism industry epitomize and reinforces. Tourism industry has an exploitative power structure where, where ultimate losers are the people of the town and the environment, which is harmed for the sake of material gains of hotel industry or tourist industry. While Kincaid expresses anger towards slavery, colonialism, and broken Antiguan identity that it has left in its wake, she avoids retreating to simple rationalization in order to explain the past and present. Kincaid sheds light on the oppressive structures of colonialism, which is evident in the learned power structure of present-day post-colonial Antigua. Tourism and tourism effect on natural landscape, tourism effect on the poor people of uh, those areas which are away from city, that is reflection of people and lands exploitation for the sake of tourism. No, I have to mention two post-apocalyptic novels. One is Shipbreaker. Shipbreaker is a post-apocalyptic novel by Paolo Galuppi that presents human civilization in decline for ecological reasons. Polar ice caps have melted and New Orleans is underwater. On the Gulf Coast, nearby humanity has reverted to survival mode and a small economy has grown from scavenging of washed up oil tankers for bits of copper and other valuables. Naylor is a 15-year-old boy in this novel who works on the light crew. Naylor's mother died when he was a young boy, and Naylor now lives with his alcoholic and drug-addicted father, Richard Lopez. After a storm, Naylor rescues Nita, the daughter of a wealthy merchant, and helps her to get back home. Unfortunately, this infuriates several parties, including his father, the local power brokers, and Nita's father's enemies, including Nita's uncle, Pice. Naylor is scavenging through an old rusty ship for copper wire as he crawls through the darkness looking for scavenge to make quota. He dreams of traveling through the bright blue waters of the flooded oceans. While gathering copper wire, Naylor falls through the duct and lands in a deep pool of oil. Sloth, another crew member, finds Naylor in the oil pocket, but decides to leave him to die because uh, Sloth wants Naylor's job and she wants to sneak the oil out of the ship and sell it. Luckily, Naylor is able to escape the oil and washes up on the beach. Naylor is impaled by a rusty piece of metal and he survives. A storm arrives shortly after Naylor's father, Richard, passes out due to a drug overdose. Sadhna, Prima's mother, helps wake Richard up and saves him from the storm. After 2 nights, storm finally subsides. Naylor and Prima decide to check the beach for scavenge. They find a massive clipper ship stranded on the beach. With a lot of hesitation, the two light crew teenagers save survivor of the ship, Nita, whose nickname is Lucky Girl. After Naylor saves Nita, Richard wants to kill the girl and steal the scavenge. Paima lunges at Richard with a knife but is overpowered. Richard decides to show mercy because Paima's mother, Sadhna, had saved him from the storm. Richard decides to spare Nita. Soon after, Naylor becomes sick and sleeps for 3 days. Lucky girl Nita eventually tells Pema and Naylor the truth. She ran away to safety because her uncle, who wishes to sell illegal tar sand, aims to use her as leverage against her father. Naylor decides to leave with Nita and a half-man named Tool to New Orleans. After jumping trains, they arrive in New Orleans. They wait for a ship called Dauntless, a ship loyal to Nita's father. Eventually, the Dauntless arrives, but Dauntless does, but so does Richard. Richard is dressed as a swank. Swank means a rich man. Uh, Naylor scouts the ship after returning to his and Nita's hideout. Naylor discovers that Richard and Nita's uncle have kidnapped her. Naylor joins Captain Candleless and the rest of the Dauntless crew on a high-speed chase after the Pole Star. Naylor learns how to read and work on the gear system in the depths of the ship. During some high-speed maneuvering, Dauntless ship outsmarts the other ships. The crew members of Dauntless board the ship and Naylor searches for Nita. When he encounters his father and a fight ensues, using his new found ability to read and his experience with the gear system, Naylor wins, killing Richard, his father, and he saves Nita. Novel ends with Naylor meeting Nita again on the same beach where they once met. An American novelist and Pulitzer Prize winner Cormac McCarthy has also written a post-apocalyptic novel, The Road. The Road is a journey of a father and his young son over a period of several months across a landscape that is blasted by unspecified cataclysm that has destroyed industrial civilization and almost all life. Because in industrial world, we are seeing that are chemicals and weapons are being manufactured that can cause blast. A Pakistani novelist Uzma Aslam Khan has written a novel Thinner Than Skin. Uzma Aslam Khan's novels have multiple layers. Thinner Than Skin is set among the magnificent landscape of glaciers, mountains, river, and valleys in northern Pakistan, and the indigenous Gujar people, handsome, hospitable, and in control of their destinies until the scourge of terrorism begins to destroy their lives. Jamaica can kids, the idea can be seen how gradually landscape is made a target. Novel delves into emotions of grief and love as Uzma Aslam attempts to show how lives are unraveled without warning and individuals shaped by their environment. There are three parallel perspectives in this novel. She navigates through the mountains terrain with the expertise of a seasoned adventurer. She's known not to stay away from fearlessly probing into relationship and what silently lingers within the private realm. Indra Sinha is an Indian novelist, and Indra Sinha's novel Animals People. Animal, by the way, is a nickname of a survivor or victim of uh, of a Bhopal tragedy of radiation. Sinha's narrator is a 19-year-old orphan, Khofpur, born a few days before 1984 Bhopal disaster, whose spine has become so twisted that he must walk on all fours. Ever since he can remember, he has gone on all fours, known to everyone simply as Animal. He rejects sympathy, he spouts profanity, and obsesses about sex. Animal lives with a crazy old French nun whose name is Franchi, and a dog, Jara. Animal falls in love with the local musician daughter Nisha. Story was recorded in Hindi on a series of tapes by Animal himself, and it has been translated to English as well. Author uses Animal's odd mixture of Hindi, French, and Indian English, such as the variants of company and journ- journalists, James Ponding. Last is Patricia Grace. She is a writer from New Zealand. She is known for her novel Poteke. That's uh, Grace has written seven novels, uh, seven short story collections, a non-fiction biography, and an autobiography. Her work explore Maori life and culture. Maori is ancient life of New Zealand people, very like Aborigines of Australia. Her most well-known novel, Patricia, features Maori community opposing the private development of their ancestral land. Mean private development is in industrial development. Patricia is the story of a Maori community struggle to regain control of their ancestral lands. Having had their land acquired to build an airfield during First World War, these land holders were dispersed into rental accommodation so that it became almost impossible to sustain their culture and traditions. Then the broken people were rejuvenated by a charismatic leader. That charismatic leader used the legal system to facilitate the return of the land, but enough for those who wanted to resume farming and rebuild community life. So when the adjacent development needs an access road right through the meeting house, small community is vulnerable to great pressure. There are negotiations, there are implied threats. Eventually, both sides take the law into their own hands. Pataki makes no pretense at being even-handed. Rohimita, her husband, Hemi, and their children reject the values that lie behind the development, but the developers are not only unempathetic, they have no redeeming features. Although the community farms at subsistence level and they themselves have some anxiety about the future of their children, they attach no importance to amenities for tourists. They already have a view, they can already go fishing, they can already see wildlife. There is no need to build a Disney field resort to please visitors. In actually capitalist economy and in one dimension of capitalist economy, that's hoteling industry, making resorts and tourist spots. Purpose is to earn money, and the earner is definitely the businessman, not the community, which land is snatched, which environment is corrupted. Uh, Margaret Atwood is a Canadian novelist, though she is known for Canadian consciousness. In her novels, one idea that is called the wilderness. Wilderness is wilderness and adventure. These are two ideas in Canadian fiction, and that is reflected in her novel, Margaret Atwood's novel Surfacing 2. Basically, Surfacing echoes the structures of Jack Kerouac's On the Road as a narrator travels by car to her childhood home. Novel has been compared to Sylvia Plath's Belger. Atwood's unnamed narrator and Plath Esther Greenwood are both driven to psychological breakdowns. Simon Ortiz, he has written non-fiction, Fight Back for the Sake of the People, for the Sake of Land. Uh, he is